When Joe Biden was first elected, millions of people expected that the pendulum would swing back to the opposite extreme in American foreign policy. And as we're going to discuss in this video, that it would swing back to the opposite extreme in terms of U.S. domestic economic policy, industrial policy, manufacturing policy, that we would see a transition from the stark anti-China rhetoric of Donald Trump to a Democratic presidency that was similar to Bill Clinton in broad brushstrokes, in being pro-China and optimistic about economic cooperation with China. And the real meaning of economic cooperation is factories close down in the United States of America and Americans increasingly buy everything manufactured in China, including this cellular phone being used to create this YouTube video right now. To almost everyone's surprise, Joe Biden's China policy was instead one of naive hyper-trumpism. Okay? Hyper-trumpism. He was more Trump than Trump. He went beyond, far beyond Donald Trump in making an enemy out of communist China. And it was naive. Biden was naive because he imagined that simply by making an enemy out of China, he would make an ally out of India, and that he would suddenly have a very close alliance with a number of other smaller, weaker powers like communist Vietnam, that had nothing in common with the United States except shared fear and hostility towards communist China. Let me name for you two of the most profoundly anti-American countries on earth: India, Vietnam. It was ludicrous. It was naive. But fundamental thing to point out here is that Joe Biden's policy on purely political grounds, or you could even say on ethical and moral grounds, was more anti-China, more anti-communist than Donald Trump had been immediately before. The news this week in 2024 is that if elected for a second term of office, Donald Trump is now promising to be even more anti-communist China still. He is promising a 60% tariff, a 60% punitive tax on all goods imported from China. So this cellular phone I'm using right now, made in China, what if this phone had a 60% tax on it? The lamp that's just off camera, so on and so forth, right? The shower curtain in my shower, I'm pretty sure, is made in China. So much of what we use and own in the post-Bill Clinton era is manufactured in China. So the shallow reaction to this, most news commentators have responded by saying, well, the problem is that cost of living will get worse. The cost of a cellular phone, the cost of a shower curtain, the cost of so many of the plastic items that surround us in our daily life. This is actually not the most important problem. America needs to manufacture goods that are competitive, domestically and internationally, in many, many different spheres. The United States of America cannot make a product that is better than the Chinese competition, nor a product that is cheaper than the Chinese competition. So if you create this barrier to trade, you will create a protected market for American companies to start creating goods that nobody in Europe will want to buy, nobody in Japan will want to buy. I would even go so far as to say nobody in Canada will want to buy, nobody in Mexico will want to buy. American manufacturing companies, industry of various kinds, will start producing products inferior to those made in China and at a higher price, or at least they're only a comparable price because of the 60% tax put on them. One of the most hotly contested examples of this is actually solar panels. For no good reason, for totally irrational, sentimental reasons, the American government wants to think that America can be self-sufficient in solar panels. And the brutal reality is this: look, do you care about the environment or not? China makes the best solar panels in the world in terms of quality. They make the most in terms of quantity, in terms of availability, their ability to actually furnish America with thousands and thousands of these things. And they make them at the best price. right? That is discussed in the media every so often because it's discussed in the House of Congress every so often. Congress and the Senate debate to what extent they should punish China and try to exclude Chinese-made solar panels, because supposedly the bright future is factories in Michigan assembling solar panels that are either at a better quality than those made in China or at a lower price or both. And that is never going to happen. You did not invest for the last 30 years in developing your solar panel industry, and you can't catch up with China now. It's too late. Another example that's less often in the news, and less often do I hear anyone from Congress discussing or paying attention to it, buses. Okay, a public transportation bus, this kind of bus, whether you're thinking of a Greyhound bus or a bus that operates within one city, guess who makes the best quality of buses in the world at the lowest price? Even the Japanese have to recognize it's China, all right? Quality, price, everything else. The United States of America needs one hell of a lot of buses. The United States of America needs to totally revamp and improve public transportation, partly for ecological reasons. That's why I mentioned it in parallel to this issue of solar panels. So do you want to get serious about ecology? Do you want to get serious about providing great quality public transportation to poor people in America? Or do you want to punish China? Now, in Joe Biden's case, the answer is clear. For primarily moral reasons, he wants to punish China. China is not a democracy. Xi Jinping, he feels, is personally evil, and therefore he wants to punish China in this way. This leads us into a series of rather peculiar moral quandaries. Are you telling me communist China is more evil than Saudi Arabia? I mean, I think it would be an interesting thought experiment to have a punitive tax on every country in the world equally that does not live up to our standard of democracy. This is one question, and we now set it aside. The other question is this. When you look at the map of the world, who can the United States of America be in an alliance with? Joe Biden has taken the hypothetical possibility of America switching sides now from being in a pro-China alliance, an alliance that began infamously under Richard Nixon, switching from that to being in a pro-India, anti-China alliance. So up until the election of Joe Biden, that was merely a hypothetical question drawn up on the chalkboard, perhaps in some political science classrooms. What would happen if? How would history be different if? Well, guess what Joe Biden demonstrated? You can't do it, all right? The most fundamental reason why the United States of America has been in a strategic partnership with communist China was that it was possible to be in an alliance with China. It is not possible for the United States to be in an alliance with India, Iran, Vladimir Putin's Russia, innumerable other examples we can give. This is one very, very fundamental problem with political science. You cannot look at arrangements that are optimal. You have to look at relationships that are possible and then find the way forward that's going to have positive consequences, positive outcomes, and is going to be not too morally unconscionable within that framework. Now, in case you guys didn't know, this alliance between the United States of America and communist China, it meant so much to Richard Nixon that he was willing to support the most notorious communists in the history of the world. He was willing to provide military support to Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, a policy that continued long after the end of Richard Nixon's political career. He committed the United States of America to supporting these terrible communists who were responsible for so much death, torture, massacre, so much starvation, and so on, so much misery in Cambodia. He was willing to do that just to cement, just to solidify this alliance, which was not just a military alliance with China. It was also a military alliance with Pakistan from the very start under Nixon in the 1970s, okay? And in case you have forgotten, Pakistan was a significant U.S. military ally, even if a terrible, hypocritical, and utterly immoral one, in the wars that ensued after September 11th, 2001, and that continued under Barack Obama and started to fizzle out under Donald Trump and then in the first years of Joe Biden. To say Pakistan was important to the history of Afghanistan and the American war in Afghanistan is an understatement. So this isn't ancient history that the people of India have forgotten about. Back when China and Pakistan both were at war with India, which side was the United States of America on? Okay? The United States of America was on the wrong side. It was totally immoral. It was totally irrational. It was based fundamentally on Nixon's paranoid delusion that the Indians, the people of India, the government of India, because they were buying military hardware from the Soviet Union, that they were a de facto pro-Russian, pro-Soviet country. It's also true at that time, the government of India had a lot of vague, namby-pamby rhetoric about socialism. As you can see today, India is no more and no less socialist than any other 21st century democracy. They still have some pretensions to socialism, but they are fundamentally a capitalist, free market, parliamentary democracy derivative of the British tradition, with a few of their own ideas thrown into the Constitution, thrown into the mix. Largely, I mean, if you want to understand the politics of India, you can start by studying the politics of Canada. These are both very much, directly derivative of the British parliamentary tradition. And they have a similar pseudo-democracy, married to capitalist free market principles. So Nixon made the wrong call. And overnight, Joe Biden tries to reverse the course of history. Joe Biden tries to make an enemy out of China, which he succeeds in doing. And he imagines incorrectly that the dominoes will stand upright, the dominoes that have been knocked down since the 1970s. And again, it's not just ancient history. Dominoes that Barack Obama and all the other Afghanistan warrior presidents had knocked down again and again and again, refreshing the memory of the people and government of India and reinforcing India's profound anti-Americanism. Okay, so he thinks he can make an enemy out of China, and then all the dominoes will be stood back up, and he can start knocking dominoes down in the other direction. The United States of America can become India's #1 ally. And even worse, he thinks that India will now be willing to make an enemy out of Russia. Russia that has remained their, strategic partner at least, basically since World War II. I was going to say at least since the 1970s. Okay, so Joe Biden found out the hard way that he can't make water go up the waterfall. He can't change the tide of history, however you want to put this. And now we have Donald Trump proposing that we're going to take a step from merely trying to politically bully communist China into becoming a democracy. We're going to take a step into economically trying to force China to become a democracy. Now, let me just pause to say what's right with China in a brief kind of global overview. Communist China is not a democracy, but you know what it is? It is a secular republic run by highly civilized, highly literate people. This is a refined civilization that values book learning more than we do. I kid you not. The people of China, the intellectual caliber of the people of China, the depth of historical awareness of the people of China is second to none. Would you rather be in an alliance with the people of China or the people of Saudi Arabia? Communist China is not a democracy, okay? It is a secular republic. Secular counts for a lot. Republic counts for a lot. It's not a monarchy. It's not a theocracy. The most important reason to cultivate an alliance with the Chinese is that it is possible to be in an alliance with them. And when you look at the map of the world, Many of these powerful countries will always and immutably be the enemies of the United States of America, and we may say profoundly, the enemies of democracy. China's system of university education, for better or worse, what is it modeled on? The American system of university education. Wealthy people in China, when they save up money, where do they want to send their sons and daughters to study? Not Japan, not Russia, not Iran. Occasionally, the Chinese want to send their kids to Germany. Occasionally, England, Cambridge and Oxford. But the number one destination, what it is the Chinese people admire culturally, economically, intellectually, and even politically, is the United States of America. The ingredients are there for, what can I say? The ingredients are there for a kind of political compatibility between the United States of America as a semi-democratic constitutional republic and the People's Republic of China as an anti-democratic constitutional republic. Economically, is it better to treat China as your colleague or as your enemy? Is it better now to create a 60% tariff barrier, a punitive barrier to trade to imports from China? Okay. I can phrase the question thusly. Does the United States of America want to revive and expand its industry by making products that people in Western Europe are willing to buy in terms of price and quality? Does the United States of America want to revive and expand its industry by making products that the people of Japan are willing to buy? Or do you want to start manufacturing products that can only be sold within the United States of America because they can neither compete with what China creates in terms of price or distinctive quality? There are ways to press China to move towards democracy. This is not one of them. It's not going to work. Economic pressure has never moved the tiny island of Cuba 1 inch closer to being a real democracy in the last 50 years. How much closer to democracy has America's number one ally, Turkey, come in the last 50 years? How about Saudi Arabia? America has to get real about the immorality of its political alliances, and America has to start having a truly pragmatic attitude towards how to organize trade so that you are charging tariffs, you are charging fees on imports that in a proportionate way punish those countries that have a minimum wage significantly lower than the United States of America. Competition with China is unfair, but competition with Mexico is unfair also. And it's for the same reason that has nothing to do with communism. The United States of America needs to force Mexico to raise the minimum wage so that there's fair competition, factory production. They need to force China to raise the minimum wage. You can do that through tariff and trade policy, but you cannot live out this fantasy that a strong arm foreign policy that has already failed in Cuba will now work on a much larger scale and much higher risk in China.